All right, ready for another deep dive. Today we're heading to ancient Jerusalem, to the Second Temple, but we're going deeper than the surface level. You've given us some really interesting texts about it, stuff that goes way beyond the usual history book.
Definitely, this wasn't just any structure. It was the heart of Jewish faith and identity, all while empires were rising and falling around them.
It's like the perfect historical backdrop. You've got this incredible structure, but I'm guessing it wasn't a simple knock it down, build it up situation after the first temple was destroyed.
No, not at all. Think about it. Losing the first temple was huge. It held the Ark of the Covenant, sacred relics, everything. When Cyrus the Great took over after conquering Babylon, he actually let those exiled Jews go back to Jerusalem and rebuild. Imagine that feeling, the hope mixed with the weight of all they'd lost.
Wow, it really puts things into perspective. So they're back in Jerusalem, ready to rebuild, but missing some pretty key elements. How do they even begin to tackle that?
That's where those emergency measures came in, tough decisions by the rabbis. For example, they allowed a temporary altar even before the temple itself was finished. Shows you how crucial it was to keep their faith alive, even if it meant changing tradition.
That's incredible. It speaks to their dedication, their resilience. This wasn't just construction. It was something much bigger. Now, I have a feeling this rebuilding wasn't without its drama.
Let's just say it was a politically charged situation. You've got the Persians watching their every move, neighbors like the Samaritans causing trouble, even disagreements among the Jewish community itself.
Well, hold on. The Samaritans. Now, that's interesting. I always thought they were on board with the whole monotheistic thing. What was their problem with the Second Temple?
Now that's a rivalry for the ages. Both groups traced their roots back to the Israelites, but they had different interpretations of their shared history, different scriptures, different views on holy sites. The Samaritans even offered to help build the Second Temple.
You're kidding. What happened? I can't imagine that went down well.
You're right about that. It was seen as a power move, trying to insert themselves into something the Jewish people saw as theirs alone. They basically said, "We appreciate it, but no thanks." That rejection really fueled the tension between them for centuries.
Talk about awkward neighbors. It's amazing anything got built at all. But then there's the elephant, or should I say, the king in the room, Herod the Great. Didn't he make some massive changes to the Second Temple?
He sure did. Love him or hate him, Herod knew how to make an impact. Expanding the Second Temple was his way of solidifying his power and creating something so awe-inspiring it would leave people speechless. We're talking doubling the size of the Temple Mount with this massive platform, making it the biggest religious sanctuary of that time.
Now that's what I call a makeover. What were some of the key things he added?
One of the most impressive has to be the royal stoa. Picture a grand hall with columns, a common sight in Roman architecture used for public gatherings. Josephus, the historian, makes it sound incredible, a real testament to Herod's ambition and the skill of those builders. But get this. There's debate about whether Herod actually built it.
Wait, a historical mystery. Now you've got my attention. Tell me more.
Right. Recent digs near the Western Wall suggest the royal stoa might actually be the work of King Agrippa, who ruled almost a century after Herod. If that's true, it changes everything. Was it a way to appease the Jewish people? Or an attempt to rival Roman architecture? It's still a puzzle for archaeologists and historians.
I love how there's always more to uncover. Speaking of uncovering things, you mentioned something earlier about a place of trumpeting. Did they actually find it?
Well, it wasn't quite a lost city moment, but it was close. Excavations near the Western Wall uncovered a stone inscribed with "Place of Trumpeting." Now imagine, every week a priest would stand on that very spot, announcing the start and end of the Sabbath with a trumpet blast. You would have heard it echo through the whole city.
Wow, you're giving me chills. You're right, it's more than just the building itself. It's about the rituals, the sounds, the daily life that happened there. Anything else they found?
They've also found inscriptions warning non-Jews about the temple boundaries. It's a stark reminder of the social and religious hierarchy back then. These weren't just words on stone. They were rules that everyone, especially pilgrims coming to Jerusalem, had to follow.
And these weren't just casual tourists, right? These were people journeying from all over the Roman Empire to reach this one place.
Exactly. We're talking the journey of a lifetime, filled with hardship and anticipation. They'd get to Jaffa, a major port city, and immediately have to switch their Roman coins for Tyrian currency, a special coin they deemed acceptable for temple offerings. Talk about a captive market. Then they begin their trek to Jerusalem, which could take days.
I can't even imagine what it must have been like to finally see the Second Temple after that long journey, the culmination of their faith, this awe-inspiring structure right there in front of them.
It was more than a building. It was the embodiment of their faith, their history, who they were.
And sadly, we all know this story doesn't exactly have a happy ending.
It really doesn't. The year 70 CE, that's a pivotal moment. You've got the Roman Empire facing unrest and rebellions, and they decide to make an example of Jerusalem.
And of course, the Second Temple, this enduring symbol of Jewish resilience, right in the crosshairs.
The siege of Jerusalem, it was brutal. By the end, the Second Temple was engulfed in flames. This wasn't just a military loss. It was devastating for the Jewish people, a loss that cut deep spiritually.
And to this day, Tisha B'Av, it's still observed as a day of mourning, of fasting, a way to remember that destruction. Makes you think, what happens to a faith when its most sacred site is gone?
That's a question that echoes through history, isn't it? With the temple gone, their relationship with God had to change. No more animal sacrifices, no more rituals done by priests in the temple. Everything they knew was gone.
So out of all that, what came next? How did Judaism adapt to this massive loss?
That's where we see Rabbinic Judaism taking root, the very form practiced by millions today. Synagogues, which were already around, became even more vital as places to gather, to study, to pray. The focus shifted to different things: prayer, studying the Torah, interpreting Jewish law.
So instead of priests in a central place of worship, you have this more decentralized approach to faith centered around texts.
Exactly. And leading this transition were the rabbis, those scholars of Jewish law and tradition. They became the spiritual guides, helping people navigate this new world without the temple.
Fascinating how such a devastating event could lead to such a fundamental change. Are there any examples of those emergency measures we talked about earlier that really highlight this shift?
Absolutely. Take ritual purity, for instance. Back in Second Temple Judaism, it was a huge part of life, especially for priests. All these rules about cleansing, avoiding certain things, considered impure.
Sounds complicated. How did that work without the temple?
Well, with no temple and the priesthood not functioning as before, those daily rituals lost their context. But the rabbis saw the spiritual value and found ways to adapt.
So they didn't just abandon the whole idea of purity.
Not at all. Instead of physical acts of purification in the temple, the focus shifted. Things like honesty, kindness, justice, these became more central. It became less about outward rituals and more about what was going on inside, spiritually.
Like they took those core principles of their faith and made them relevant to this new reality. It makes you wonder what other elements of Second Temple Judaism might have continued in new forms.
It's a great question. Shows the adaptability of faith. Take the synagogue, for example. It wasn't new. It was already a place for prayer and study. But without the temple, it took on even more significance as the main gathering place for communities.
Like aspects of their faith, already there but maybe in the shadow of the temple, suddenly took center stage. Such a complex and fascinating period. What sources have given you the clearest understanding of life at the Second Temple?
It's like piecing together clues from the past. The writings of Josephus, a historian from that time, they're invaluable, though we have to remember his pro-Roman leanings.
You have to consider those perspectives, right? Living through those times, yet navigating the politics of the Roman Empire.
For sure. But even with that, Josephus gives us vivid descriptions of the temple, the rituals, the underlying tensions. Remember the Golden Eagle incident?
Yeah. Oh, right. That's one for the history books.
It really was. Herod, trying to appease Rome, put a golden eagle, a Roman symbol, at the temple entrance. You can imagine how that went over with many Jews who saw it as desecrating their sacred space.
A PR disaster if there ever was one. It's stories like that that make history come alive.
Absolutely. And then we have the Mishnah, collection of rabbinic teachings, put together a couple centuries after the temple's destruction.
So a glimpse into how they interpreted and preserved those traditions.
Exactly. The Mishnah goes into incredible detail about the temple layout, the priests, the sacrifices. It's a gold mine of information.
It's really amazing how much we've learned from these texts and archaeological finds. We've covered so much, from political maneuvering to amazing architecture to this huge shift in religious practice. Makes you think about how the Second Temple's impact is still felt today, even though it's gone.
It really is a lasting impact. It's like those stones on the Temple Mount. They've absorbed so much history, hopes and dreams, struggles, you name it.
It really makes you wonder, with all that history, what was it like for those pilgrims back then to stand in the shadow of this incredible structure, surrounded by the sights and sounds of it all?
Oh, it must have been an intense experience to be in that very place, so central to their faith, where generations before them had prayed and made sacrifices. It reminds us that history isn't just about dates and names. It's about what those events meant to people, those human experiences.
You're right. It's about those personal stories. And the story of the Second Temple isn't just about its construction or its destruction. It's also about what came after, that shift to Rabbinic Judaism, which is still so relevant today.
Exactly. And it shows the resilience of the Jewish people. Faced with such a profound loss, they found ways to adapt, to hold on to their faith, and even thrive. It's really powerful how even in the face of tragedy, that human resilience can shine through.
It makes you consider the legacy of the Second Temple, even though it hasn't existed for centuries.
A legacy that continues to spark debate today. I mean, think about the idea of rebuilding a third temple on that same ground.
Right, that adds a whole other layer of complexity, doesn't it? Especially considering how sensitive the Temple Mount is, a place sacred to different faiths.
Absolutely. A third temple raises so many questions. Could it be built in a way that respects all those different faiths? Is it even possible to recreate what the Second Temple meant spiritually in today's world?
It's like the Second Temple, even after all this time, still makes us think critically about history, about faith, about the future.
That's what makes it so fascinating, right? This deep dive hasn't just been about uncovering facts. It's about wrestling with these big questions, these echoes from the past that still resonate with us today.
It reminds us that history isn't set in stone. It's not just something you read in a textbook. It's an ongoing conversation, a way to understand ourselves and the world better.
I couldn't agree more.
So next time you encounter a historical site, whether it's a grand monument or even just ruins, take a moment to think about the stories those stones hold. The people who walked there, what they believed, the challenges they faced.
Because those stories, even the ones lost to time, they've shaped us in ways we can't even imagine. Second Temple might be gone, but what it stood for, the lessons, the way it makes us question and wonder, that's what endures.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. Picture yourself standing before the Second Temple in its prime. Can you hear those prayers, feel the crowd, sense the weight of history all around you? What emotions come up? That connection to the past, that spark of curiosity, that's what keeps history alive. Until next time, keep exploring.